Welcome to episode 7 of the Going for Broke Outdoors podcast, a podcast by an outdoorsman for other outdoorsmen. I'm your host, Jeremy Gillespie. In today's episode, we welcome Justin Wright. Justin is an incredibly humble guy, but an absolute assassin with the bow and arrow. Justin has been crushing big public land bucks consistently year after year. In this episode, we focus on Justin's approach to getting on mature deer, and we spend a lot of time discussing his bread and butter tactic, which is aggressive in-season scouting. Along the way, we also cover Justin's approach to hunting new properties and making the most of his time on out-of-state hunts, as well as his favorite time to hunt mornings and when he completely avoids a morning hunt. One administrative note before we get started, I did have some technical difficulties while recording this episode, so the volume may be a bit off, along with some other minor irregularities. However, I spent a lot of time cleaning up the audio, and I think the information contained in this episode will absolutely make up for any technical issues. Guys, if you haven't already stopped by Stealth Outdoors at www.stealthoutdoors.com to outfit your mobile hunting setup with some silencing gear, you're really missing out. There's not a better product on the market for eliminating unwanted noise. Stealth Outdoors manufactures an incredibly durable product for a great value. Designed from the ground up with the mobile hunter in mind, Stealth Outdoors manufactures climbing stick wraps, cam buckle covers, platform cable wraps, and stealth strip rolls for all of your miscellaneous silencing needs. Head over to www.stealthoutdoors.com to outfit your mobile hunting setup. Speaking of mobile hunting setups, consider upgrading yours with a set of stick talons from mobilehuntinggear.com. Stick talons offer a way to securely fasten most popular climbing sticks to a variety of mobile hunting tree stands and now saddle platforms. Not only do the stick talons provide secure climbing stick transport to and from your hunting location, they also aid at the tree setups by keeping climbing sticks organized and quiet on your stand while ascending the tree. Mobile Hunting Gear also offers customized solutions for just about any mobile setup. Reach out to mobilehuntinggear.com for a customized quote. Now, on to the podcast. On the phone, I've got Justin Wright. Hey, Justin, how are you doing today?
Good, man. How about yourself?
Can't complain. Weather's starting to warm up. Got shed hunting season just around the corner here. Supposed to be mid-40s all next week in Montana, so excited to start getting out there.
Yeah, we're getting some snow melt as well here. Actually, most of the snow is gone now, so I'm looking forward to hopefully getting out a little bit this weekend and doing some shed hunting and a little scouting.
Yep, it's good to shake off the dust from the winter and start getting back after it. So, man, I'm excited to have you on as a guest. From what I've seen on the Hunting Beast forum, since you've joined, I'd say you're probably one of the best practitioners of capitalizing on hot sign in season. And that's going to be one of our main focus areas of our conversation today. So, Justin, first of all, let's start out by having you give a little background about yourself. What state or states do you hunt? How long have you been hunting? How were you first introduced to hunting? And were there any defining moments in your hunting career when you realized that you were just plain addicted?
Yeah, so I grew up, I pretty much have grown up in the woods. My dad and my grandfather started me at a really young age, especially my dad. I was out, before I could even, legally carry a gun, I went with him a little bit. And he was a big scouter back in the day. He was mainly a rifle hunter, but I learned a lot from him, and woodsmanship. And the same with my grandfather. He was a huge, outdoorsman. And I mean, I spent time out there, hunting squirrels, rabbits. That was one of my passions growing up. And I really, really got into the deer. There was just something that, I don't know, just fascinated me about them. So, took off on that and just have been basically addicted, I guess you would say, from day one on them. I don't know. They just do something for me. But mainly I've grown up and hunted in kind of the hills of South Missouri, Southern Missouri. It's kind of rolling hills around here. Where I grew up, there was actually very, very little to no ag. I actually didn't even hunt around any ag. So it was mainly, the rolling hills, bigger timber, maybe some cattle fields here and there. So it was kind of tough hunting, but I think that kind of shaped me into, and I'm nothing. I still don't think I'm anything special, but I think it helped me along the way. It was some hard hunting. You had to, there could be days you would sit out there and not even see a deer. So it shaped me, and it taught me patience and a lot of trial and error along the way. Well, a lot of a lot of error. Um, and it just, I think it's kind of led me to where I'm at nowadays, I guess you could say. I can't really say as far as defining moments. There was so like, I guess it was probably in my late teens. I really got into wanting to kill, a good buck. And I had some bad luck, impatient, Russian shots and so on and so forth. But there was one deer in particular. He was a very large deer that came up on me, and I made a rush shot. I hit him bad, and spent, I think it was a couple of days. I know we spent the rest of that day, and then we came back later and looked for an entire day, actually, to the point that me and my dad got turned around and barely made it out of the woods before dark that day. But we never found him, and I don't know. To me, that just ate me alive to lose a deer like that, because I wanted that success. I wanted to kind of fit in, if you will, with my dad and my grandfather. I wanted their approval, and just wanted to climb that ladder. And it was definitely not a tough or not an easy thing for me to do. I'm sorry. It was, I don't know, just a lot of mistakes along the way. But, I think you have to make those in order to truly learn when to make your moves, and what to do, what you can get away with, what you can't. A lot of error, a lot of error along the way.
Yeah, that's a good segue into the next question. So, in preparation for the podcast here, I went back and read a lot of your old posts on the hunting beast. And one of the things that I read was a post where you were describing your early days of hunting. And it sounds like success didn't come easy for you initially. I mean, you mentioned losing that first good buck. What drove you to keep trying and keep improving as a hunter during those days? And did you have any breakthrough moments around that time?
Well, by nature, I'm kind of a competitive person. Played sports and stuff growing up, and I've just been a real competitive person. And failure, so I guess you would say, drives me crazy. So when that happened to me, losing that deer, um, my family actually was my grandfather and my dad did bow hunt. So it was that summer I decided to pick up a bow, and I got real serious and uh, and got into that. Actually, got my dad into it as well. But I just started reading everything I could, of course, watching the videos, and then I started scouting more. I started putting more time in the woods. That's probably around the time that I kind of gave up some of the small game hunting too, kind of stopped rabbit hunting and squirrel hunting as much as I'd, done in the previous years. And I spent more time just trying to learn more about, whitetails and behavior, learn more about deer. Um, just really hit it hard. So that was definitely a turning point. But prior to that, I had many encounters with bucks. I think there was a 6 or 7 year span there where I mean, it was one bad thing after one bad decision, one bad move, one bad shot. I mean, it was just one thing after another that I did, and made so many mistakes. But again, those hard lessons are the ones that stick with you and you learn. So I had to make those, and fortunately, I learned a little bit along the way.
Yeah, I think everybody that's been bow hunting for any amount of time has got a whole closet full of those stories where coulda, shoulda, woulda, or a bunch of almost, and that's just the nature of the game, especially early on, like you said. So that's a good segue into the next question. And you've already mentioned mistakes. I think making mistakes, it's an important part of the evolution for any successful hunter. What do you think were three of the biggest mistakes you made early on in your career? And what did those mistakes teach you? Did you do anything to correct or overcome those as you evolved as a hunter?
Yeah, I would say, first off, it would have been over hunting spots. I didn't, of course, I didn't have a great idea of, on whitetails and stuff. There was definitely literature out there, but it was, and, on DVDs, I watched tons of those, but it was all this, and no, nothing against it, but it was all this kind of big private farm hunting stuff. And really it didn't fit what I was hunting. I was hunting public land. Um, Basically everything I ever hunted growing up was there was other hunters that had permission. So it didn't fit, there was none of this, you go set out over a food plot and all that. So overhunting areas would be a big one for me, and rushing shots on animals. I would get so nervous, so worked up because I just wanted to kill that animal so bad. And I was notorious for rushing shots, taking bad shots, and that led to numerous bad hits, a lot of tracking. I think I'm really good at tracking because I've had so many bad hits. I've had a lot of experience in doing that, down on your hands and knees, crawling, looking for just a little prick of blood, and I guess the third thing would have been not scouting nearly enough. It was just, I did more of it, but I still not scouting enough and not knowing what to scout for, I guess would have been, good answer for that.
Yeah, I think a lot of people out there can relate. It sounds like mistakes I'm sure a lot of guys have made or still making time to time. So while we're on the mistakes topic, let's go the opposite direction. What do you think's the number one thing that's put you on big bucks up to this point? I know it's probably hard to distill it down to one item because there are so many variables, but what's one lesson or tactic that you absolutely wouldn't want to be without today?
That would be the scouting. It's kind of hard, like you said, it's kind of hard to nail it down to one, because one of the most important things, I guess, would be better, taking better shots, being more patient, really spending a lot of time with the bow and stuff too. And 'cause I mainly bow hunt. I still rifle hunt here and there, but I've mainly bow hunted the past few years. And really, getting good with the bow is number one. Anybody can get on the animals, but if you can't make the shot, make a good shot, it's going to lead to a lot of sleepless nights. So, but that, and like I said, not scouting enough. I just didn't put the time in. I didn't, and I'm kind of talking, in the early years, I didn't put nearly enough time in, and then I actually got on the beast, and I had hunted, thickets, I knew to hunt thick stuff, but I knew bedding areas, I knew to get close to that stuff, but there was a lot of stuff on there I learned, I'll say. And then I got so hung up on beds, so hung up on trying to find specific beds and stuff like that, that I was looking and searching so hard for that I was missing some other pieces, that's a small part of the equation, we've got to know so much more. There's so much more to just a bed than, finding that and then going back and hunting it. So, there's a combination of things. I could go on and on with that, but learning the bow and scouting would be, you just asked for one, but I have to say both of those.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned kind of swinging the pendulum too far the other way. That's something that I know I did as well. I know Ryan Anderson mentioned that. You get on the hunting beast and you learn this, and it's like, man, this light bulb goes off. But it takes experience getting out there, seeing, a number of beds in a number of different scenarios. And then, like you said, having that experience to gain the knowledge to realize, well, that's just a piece, right? The real work starts when you find the bed. That's not the end. That's the beginning.
Definitely.
Another thing I've noticed about you is you're a super humble guy. And I want to preface this question with that because I'm going to ask you a question that might be difficult for you to answer as a humble guy. What do you think you're doing differently than the guy that's having average results? Because you're consistently having above average results, seems like every year, sometimes multiple bucks a year, multiple states. So what do you think are the big things that you're doing different?
Well, first off, I've probably spent, it's hard for me, it's hard, I think that not too many people would believe the amount of time that I have spent in the woods. So I've probably made more mistakes than your average guy, and I've been able to learn from those, over the years. So, when you learn from that stuff, it sticks with you, and then there's kind of like this, you develop like this gut feeling, in areas you kind of know and you have to pay attention to that. That's one of the biggest things I have to say. Pay attention to your gut, like especially if you're a person that spent time out in the woods, made mistakes and all that. That is anytime that I ever go against that, I did it this year in late season, and I paid for it. I watched the buck come around me, get my wind, and I just beat myself up in the stand for knowing better than to do that. But yeah, paying attention to that. I guess, like I said, I've made tons and tons of mistakes. You learn so much from those. They hurt. They stick with you. And I feel like I'm pretty good at reading sign. I think I have maybe some different ways of reading sign than some guys do, and use areas to, kind of check out stuff for fun. So, like I said, I think I probably just made a lot more mistakes than your average guy, we'll say.
Okay, and you said people might not believe how much time you spent in the woods. Give me some context. Let's say when you got really serious about bow hunting, you started chasing big bucks. I don't know if you want to put it in hours or days or whatever, but how much time were you spending in the woods on average those years?
That was before a family, right? So I had a lot of time back then, and I definitely made use of it. I mean, it was like there for a while. It was kind of like an every weekend, all day long thing out in the woods. Gosh, even days after work and stuff. And I'm talking all year round. Even in the summer, I would be out there digging. I just couldn't get enough. I wanted more. I wanted to learn more. I wanted to find more. I wanted more intel. To put a number on it, that would be pretty much impossible for me because I haven't really logged it. But gosh, I mean, a lot of time. I mean, I have spent a lot of time. It's a little tougher for me now. I'm pretty, it might surprise maybe some guys how little time I do get now. So I have a family. I have a wife that is a nurse. She works 12-hour shifts. A lot of days I'm picking up my daughter from school. She's 9 years old. She's not able to stay in the house by herself. We don't really have any family locally. I mean, the nearest is a little, well, around an hour, we'll say, away. And my parents are about 2 hours away. So it's kind of tough. But, all those experiences and all that, that I did in my younger years has definitely helped me now. And I think that, like the in-season scouting stuff is a big thing for me now because, I don't get to cover as much ground as I used to. So I use that to my advantage. And I may have got off your specific question, but just kind of rambling. Sorry.
No, that's all right. I think from everything that I've read, the guys on the hunting beast that seem to have like the top tier type success where they're consistently shooting good bucks every year. That's a common thread I've noticed for sure. At some point, every one of those guys has basically lived in the woods for some period of their life. And I don't think there's, at least from what I've seen, there's ways to shorten that learning curve, but there's no way to completely replace just experience outdoors.
Correct. Yeah, I think experience is a big key, and that experience builds that, those gut feelings, those things that stick with you, and the more you have of that, the better off you are out there. Because woodsmanship, I think the Hunt Beast has done a good job of bringing that back to the guys out, and there's a lot of talk on scouting and stuff nowadays, and guys are learning it. But I think that there for a while, I believe that was a dying art. I really do. I mean, so many guys were just, you throw up a stand, you go back and you hunt it. You don't learn much that way. I'll say that.
I would agree. So let's go ahead and get into some of the tactics. One of the things I did here in preparation was I pulled some guys on the hunting beast, and a lot of guys were really interested in your approach to locating mature deer. It seems like every year you not only find big deer, but you manage to put them down as well. So first, can you talk about your process for locating big deer? And then second, how often are you locating these deer in areas that you're already familiar with versus how often are you finding them in a new to you area?
Okay. Well, scouting first and foremost, that's where it all starts. The day the season ends, the day the next one begins type thing. I'm out there scouting. I don't put as much emphasis on, I guess, my spring scouting, my off-season scouting as I used to. I use it a little bit more now to try to learn some new areas and whatnot. But I'm still out there, trying to find signs that there was a mature deer in the area that year, and there's a combination of things there that I'm looking for. I mean, it could be from a big rock to big tracks or sign, but I'm digging in new areas a lot this time of the year. So I use that to my advantage. Looking, I do run some cameras. I kind of run them, and I got this tactic from or this method of using trail cameras. I want to give him credit because definitely wasn't my idea, but Joe Elsinger, who's another great hunter off the Honey Bee, he's a good buddy of mine, and I've learned a lot from him in trail cameras. So I've adopted his strategy on that. I'm trying to put him out there and gather all that intel at the end of the year, and then try to use it to my advantage the following year. Not go in and check them, maybe unless I'm, walking through the area, but definitely not going in there every 2 weeks or even every month and checking those things. And you do gain a lot of intel. You get a lot of data. There's a lot to go through there. Some years, I mean, you may not catch anything in there, but I think it's a great way to use those. But I guess the number one thing for me is, and I'm sure that the guys on the beast have seen that for me, it's my in-season scouting, and I am just looking for anything. I mean, it could be, just a big fall rub that maybe lets me know that there's one at least coming through there. Then I have to, from there, figure out, would he likely be bedding anywhere nearby, or is he, most likely coming off private? Jumping them, I don't mind going and jump a big buck. That doesn't bother me a bit. That is my favorite thing to do, probably, honestly, is to go in season. I jumped him, he's right there today. Okay, that's where he wants to be, and then figure things out from there, So there's so many different ways, I guess, of locating them. Glassing, obviously, in the summer and stuff, if able to. I mean, I don't live in, farm country. There's a few areas that do. There's some ag around that I can use and do a little bit of glassing, but for the most part, it's timber and stuff. So glassing, I do use it. I ain't gonna say that it's a big tactic of mine. Trying to think what else. Yeah, I mean, those are the big keys, and I'm looking for the big sign. I'm looking for the stuff that probably everybody else is looking for. I don't know, maybe I put a little more thought or had some more experiences with it, and figuring out maybe where the big deer are at in the area. They're generally not where you would expect them, anyways. And I will say that I found it's probably a 50-50 anymore, because I'm sure anybody that hunts public land has realized this, but the pressure is going up. So some of the areas that used to do skies have found they're in there a little too much. They're putting a little too much pressure on the deer, and those big deer, most of the time, they're not put up with that, so they're moving over onto private. So it's a constant scouting thing for me. I'm constantly out there looking, searching, in new properties, new areas. I do go through and check areas that I've had previous history with too. So I'd have to say it's probably a 50-50. I mean, thing for me as far as new properties and new areas versus areas I've had some history with.
Okay, got a few follow-up questions based on your answer there. Kind of go back to the beginning here of that answer. And you mentioned using trail cameras and leaving them soak for an entire season. How many cameras are you leaving out on average a year?
I think I ran 10 this year, I believe.
You've got 10 cameras out, and when do you put them out? When do you pick them up?
Usually I'll put them out in August. Our season here in Missouri opens up September 15th. So if I can start gathering some intel then, maybe I can use that to my advantage early season the following year. Of course, you have that, in deer shed, things shift a lot, and I see that. I definitely see that on my track cameras. But that's all good intel. If it's in ag country, farm country, you definitely have to take into consideration that, maybe this year this field is beans, next year it could be corn, and that could change things up, but But yeah, I run them from about August on in through till I picked up my last one, I think, around the beginning of February. Actually, I'm sorry, no, I still have one out there that I haven't made it to yet. So it just kind of depends on timing. Usually after the season ends around January 15th, I'm out there trying to gather. And it's just a matter of how much time I have to get to.
And then once you pick those cameras up and you're looking through the cards, what specifically would stick out to you when you're reviewing those photos?
Well, anything close to daylight, anything close, even if it's an hour before. I mean, if it's a big enough property that I'm working with, and I mean, let's face it, sometimes those big boys are back in their bed an hour, before daylight too. But anything close to that, I'm really looking at, and I definitely don't go into depth like Joe. I mentioned I got that from him. I definitely don't go into depth like he does. I wish I did, but I have to admit I don't. But I'm looking at weather. I'm looking at wind, time of the year, and that sort of thing. And it's funny how habitual these animals can be. I mean, some of them, I've captured them on camera in an area and ran a camera or two there the following year and never seen anything from them. Could have died or whatever. But a lot of times you'll see even if a big buck does die, that area generally the following year, as long as most things stay the same, somewhere around that time frame, it seems to light up. So that's a great tool for me, and it's really starting to shine here the past few years. Can't say that I've killed a deer yet based on just doing that, but I am seeing where I think here in the near future that's going to lead to some success for me. So
Yeah, I think that's one of the things you start to pick up the more experience you gain is it's not enough just to find a great spot. You need to find a great spot and the great time to hunt that great spot. Do you agree?
absolutely, it's all timing. I think that's where I go back to guys getting so hung up on beds, on the beast, and I know it's hard for guys like Dane and all them to explain stuff like that into detail because a lot of it, to them is more so common sense because they've done it for so long. But I mean, that bed it's a piece. It actually is, I guess, a big piece. I'm kind of going against what I said earlier, a small piece, but you have to know when that bed is being used. I mean, and sometimes it's only used for, it could be a week at a time or not 3, 4 days, depending on many factors. But there's so much more to just a bed. And that's why I love in-season scouting because, I'm moving around and I'm seeing firsthand right in front of me what it is. Used to, I'd get out of the truck and had a destination in mind. I was going to this spot. Now I get out of the truck and I'm hunting. I'm working my way in. I'm paying attention to everything. I'm not walking past things trying to get to a specific spot. Um, or very seldom, I'll say, am I doing that.
So again, going back to the original question, so we talked about the trail cameras. One of the other things you mentioned in your answer was that if you find good sign, you try to determine if there's bedding nearby. And how are you doing that? Is that all boots on the ground? Are you going back after the fact, looking at aerial maps, some combination? And like if you do see that sign, what tips you off that, oh, this is probably where he's bedded at?
It depends if it's a property that I've had some history with. Most of the properties that I'm on, I mean, I know him pretty good, so I know if there's a big boy in an area, likely where he would be. I mean, I go through these big properties that I've hunted the past few years, anyways, pretty thoroughly because sometimes you'll find them in places you just wouldn't dream. But if it's a new property, yeah, I'll pull up, maps and look on there, trying to see if there's any kind of habitat change, what the terrain's like. Gosh, there's a lot of things there to look for, and then it's just, it's kind of I guess, a game that maybe you take a stab at it, and sometimes you're right, sometimes you're wrong, but yeah, it's definitely at that point, it's definitely pull up a map, look, see if I can find something that looks maybe favorable. Again, habitat change, it's a nasty looking area or something like that, or maybe there's a creek system there, that you could be using like an oxbow or something. But yeah, and then I'll just kind of move and work toward that area and either either find something and maybe jump it or realize that he's probably coming from private.
You mentioned jumping a buck, and that was the last question I had as a follow up question. I think more and more, this is a tactic that I've been utilizing too. Since I've moved from Michigan to Montana, I think it's absolutely killer out here. Like, I will just walk around, purposely try to jump a buck, and then set up on it. That's how I killed my buck this year. And I've been hunting in Kansas, works really well there too. So I think that's still surprising to a lot of people. So describe your process there. Let's say you're out, you're scouting in season. Obviously, you're looking for sign, and you jump a buck that you want to target. Break it down. What do you do after that? And when do you come back to hunt? What are you looking for? Are you going to hunt that exact area? Are you going to move around? If you are moving around, how do you decide? Like, kind of break down your whole process there.
Yeah, so that kind of depends on a few things. I guess first off, it would be, how how did I jump in? I mean, did I scare him to death? Or did the deer smell me? I guess how he leaves out of there tells me a lot. I've had some success on killing them coming back in that same day. The first time that really happened to me, I'll be honest, was kind of accidental. I don't want to make it sound like I planned that out. I jumped the buck, and he took off out of there, and I realized that he didn't smell me. He didn't even see me. I think he just heard me coming up through there, and he bounced out of there, and I just caught a glimpse of his rack, which it was a specific deer that I was after, and I just spent a lot of time in there trying to really figure out how I felt he would come back into the bed the following morning. Because my plan was to try to do that, the popular bump and pump. And I felt like I had pretty good odds of doing it. So I spent a lot of time in there, and it was a matter of like 50 minutes, and this thing circles around, and he's coming back in, and I killed him. And that just really opened my eyes. I mean, that first-hand experience, you can read about a guy doing that, you can hear it, you can even watch it. But until you experience it, man, it just really opens your eyes. I mean, it really sticks with you. You realize, like, okay, well, this can work. I mean, it worked for me here. So it depends on that. So, how I jump them, how spooked they are. And then from there, I'm trying to figure out, okay, if I didn't spook him real bad, and let's say it's, early in the afternoon, you got 3, 4 hours before it gets dark. I jumped him up. He didn't smell me. It felt like he just kind of bounded off. A lot of times in deer, I mean, they're just felt like coyotes, whatever it be. I think that a lot of times they run off. They just kind of circle the bedding area, and they come right back in. So I plan for that. I try to set up according to that. And that's hard to explain exactly because, I mean, that's based on what the terrain's like. If it's, hilly country, you may come in a different way, or if it's flat, or whatever it be, wherever it's bedding at, CRP field, whatever it be. Just have to, again, I think this kind of goes back to some experience that I've had, here and how they like to come back into areas. So I'm looking at that, and if I don't think that's going to work, like if I think he got my wind or something, then I'm going to look at it for possibly the following morning or the following evening. If I feel like I can't really get in there without disturbing a bunch of deer the next morning, going in the dark, I'll look more so for like an evening hunt, try to figure out where he's heading, and try to intercept him on his travel out of there. I don't know if you was wanting a little more specific on that. It's kind of situational, I guess. Terrain and stuff comes into play. In the hills, they're obviously going to try to loop down get downwind. Well, anywhere they're at, they're going to try to loop downwind of you. So you kind of have to play that into the situation. This past year, I guess I'll give you an example. I was out searching and scouting in a spot that it's kind of funny. It was actually right along a gravel road that led into a parking lot there, some public land, and there were some thickets along through there. And I didn't have a lot of time that day, so I just decided to spend some time in through there and walking through and to see, maybe by some random chance dump something. Honestly, I didn't have a whole lot of confidence, but I did it anyway. So I jumped this deer. I get in this little patch of woods and I jumped this deer. I didn't get to see him, But he took off out of there, and I looked around. There was some pretty good sign in there, some pretty big sign.
What kind of sign specifically did you see in there that made you think it was a good buck? Like rubs, scrapes, turds, tracks?
Well, there was actually a couple of tracks that I was able to cut, and there were some big rubs. There were some big sign in there, big tall rubs. And it just was one of those spots that you're just like, this is so crazy. But a lot of times when you find them spots like that, you start looking around and you're like, it's actually genius. I mean, this deer's literally watching people drive down, and it's another 400-ish yards probably to where most people park, pull in there, and then they wander on out and they go basically in the opposite direction of where he was. Um, just not many people would stop in this spot and get out. Maybe if you're rabbit hunting, there's like kind of a greenbrier thicket, some nasty smaller trees in there and stuff, but just a nasty area. And the way he took off out of there, I felt like I knew, where he was at. He was kind of close to the road. I felt like I knew how he would want to leave out of there, where he would be going. So there was a couple fields, and they're just grass fields, and there was like this ditch with a little tree line that led down through it, and it kind of come to a T. And we'll say, if he would have went left, he would have let off in the timber, and right there was a patch of persimmon trees down through there, and they were falling. I had seen some on a different property, and I knew them from scouting before. They were falling, and I felt like that was kind of the direction he was going. That was the direction the sign was leading out of there. So I made a game plan I didn't think I'd be able to get him coming back in there because I didn't know how he would come right back into that patch of woods. I felt like he could get me, it wasn't real big. I just didn't feel confident in it. So I moved on down the tree line and set up for him like he was still in that bed. I think it was 3 hours before dark. And sure enough, so the first deer that comes out of that patch of woods is there was a little buck that must have came back in through there. And when I first seen him, he came out through the field down through there that evening. I thought, and there's no way that was the deer that I jumped. There was no way that deer is laying down that sign. But he worked on down and he headed off. He actually got my wind and boogered and turned and went back up into the timber. So it was getting, close to closing time there, and sure enough, I caught a glimpse of him coming down through there. And I mean, this was close quarters. This little patch of woods was probably, oh gosh, 10-ish yards wide. And I set up, so there were some scrapes and stuff that came down along that one edge. And I set up on the opposite side, thinking that would probably be the way he would work. And sure enough, he did. He came down through there. And I think it was like 7 yards or something like that I shot him in. I mean, it was really, really close. And mind you, I'm in a saddle setting on the ground. I had my feet on the ground. I was using the saddle and I was using the tree as a smaller tree, but it worked to hide me. And I think as I got back to full draw, just as I came to full draw, he looked over at me.
Yeah, too late at that point.
Yeah, so, I just kind of played it out like that he was still in there because I felt like he would come back in there the way that I bumped him. And I'm sure that deer in that spot has probably not been spooked out of there in season because, like I said, most of the guys you're not gonna go there. It's just there's really no woods there. I mean, there's some fields and stuff that wrapped around it. And it's just one of them spots that even I was shocked, really, that he was there, but he was.
Like you said, a lot of times these bucks are hiding out in places you wouldn't necessarily expect, and if no one's going there, that's the common theme, right? They seem to find a way to end up in that empty space.
Right. Yeah, they definitely do. They can shock you sometimes.
I got 2 follow-up questions there. So going back to you're out there, you're scouting, and you jump a buck. How much time do you spend in that immediate area after you jump a buck? Are you just standing there looking around? Do you walk around and scout? Are you there 5 minutes, half hour? And what kind of information are you trying to gain in, those immediate moments afterwards?
So that one I was talking about that was kind of accidental that came back in, and I know this because I was after that deer, right? And he was in a different bedding area prior to that. Well, I'd hunted it a couple times, and he never showed. He never came out of there. So it was a rainy day, and I just decided to kind of dive in there just to see if I could jump him up. So I go in there, and there was there was sign of another hunter in there, and this guy had been up and down this tree. He was using a climbing stand, literally ripped the bark off the tree, and he was right in the bedding area. But there was a couple good rubs in there. I don't know. He probably didn't know he was hunting right in the bedding area. And about 10 yards from his tree, or from the stand, he had a trail camera. So I knew then and there that, the deer had relocated. So I was just kind of scouting along, looking for this thing, hoping that he hadn't moved off on the private, because I was working pretty close to the private anyways, where he was bedded up. So I checked this ridge, this knob, and that's again where he was. Jumped him up out of there. So I texted my dad when I jumped him. I said I just jumped him, and it was 50 minutes pretty much when he came back in there. I shot him, and after he ran off, I tried to listen to where he went, and then immediately I pulled out my phone and I texted my dad and I said I just shot him. And it was a 50-minute span there that deer had made that loop.
Are we talking 1-5 or 5-0?
5-0, 50 minutes.
Okay.
Yeah, 5-0. Yeah, almost an hour. So yeah, he came back in there. But a lot of times it varies. I do spend a lot of time in there. I like to visualize like how I think a deer would come through, how I think that a big deer would use an area. The more experience you get with them, you kind of see how they move through some terrain and stuff. So I definitely visualize that, just trying to think about how the deer would come in through there. And I'll stay there as long as I feel like I need to be honest with you. There's no real set time with that. I mean, I've spent, an hour in spots, and sometimes I'll jump them up and realize maybe the deer smelled me or something like that. I'll look it over, and if I feel like that I, have the pieces I need, I'll scoot on out of there and try to come back the next day or whenever I can. Some spots I've been in there as little as probably 15 minutes. There was a deer that I jumped, and I don't know 100% sure that it was a deer that I ended up killing this year in Illinois, but I jumped what I thought was a pretty good deer based on some rubs around there, some big rubs actually. And I jumped him out of there. I didn't get to see the deer, but he took off. He sounded like a horse running through the woods, and you could hear the antlers smacking off the small trees and the brush and whatnot. So again, I didn't see him, but I realized pretty quickly he got my wind, and got out of there. So I didn't spend a whole lot of time in there. Made a loop around it, figured out how I thought he might be coming in there, and killed him. I guess that was 2 or 3 days later. I can't remember exactly. It was something like that. 2 or 3 days later, coming back to there. So, and again, I don't know 100% sure, but that deer was heading toward that bedding area. I assumed it was him.
Yeah, and I asked that question because I kind of had a feeling your answer might be along those lines. Myself, especially early on, if I jumped a deer, 1, I thought that was the end of the world. And 2, I thought I needed to get out of that area right away and not contaminate it. But the more experience I've gained, 1, I realized, well, it's not the end of the world now. And if anything, that's a great sign that, to me, that's one of the best things I can see scouting now is a target deer, even if I did spook them. And second, spend some time in there, right? Like you said, visualize, evaluate, pick out a good tree, or if it's not in that immediate area, maybe within a 100-yard radius, if there's a trail going out, it's got his tracks on it, spend a little bit of time in there, and then get back in there immediately. And I want to ask you one question, going back to the buck you were talking about where there was the guy with the climber in there and the camera. When you relocated that deer, how far was it from that bedding area?
Probably about 300 yards, I would say. Yeah, where he relocated to was up on this knob. Actually, where he was at, the guy, if he took, and I'm sure he did, he probably came walking right down this field and through there. So that deer most likely could have seen him. And in some, I mean, this was an earlier season hunt. I think I killed him toward the end of September, maybe September 25th or something like that. But so there was still a lot of foliage on, but he was set up in a way that he could have possibly have seen that guy, or most likely even heard him. Where he passed through in front of the deer down in that field. Up onto that knob was probably about a 150-yard stand, but I still think that he was, probably could have seen or heard that guy, and it may not have been that far. But yeah, where he was at, from where he relocated, bedding would have been about 300 yards stand.
Yeah, and that's been my experience. Well, I guess in an area that has decent bedding options semi nearby, let's say 300 yards to, half mile, 900 yards, but those deer usually don't go too far. I mean, they know that area.
No, man, that's their home area. They're not gonna. I used to believe all that stuff too. I mean, I used to think, gosh, some deer jump one, well, that's over with. I'll never see that deer again. And he's probably 2 miles over or whatever. And that's just that's not true. That's not. I don't believe that for a second. Maybe in some areas that happens. I got a buddy that lives up north or whatever that's told me that in the smaller patches of woods in Michigan actually, you jump a deer and he's liable to run 2 miles to the next patch of woods or whatever, he'll get out of there because it's smaller. You're dealing with smaller size chunks of woods, so I get that. But where I'm at, there's a lot of timber. There is some ag and stuff around on some of these properties I hunt, but they don't have to run like that. They can relocate a couple hundred yards, and I don't think they want to get away from that area. It's kept them, especially if it's an old mature deer. I mean, it's kept them alive to the age they're at now. So they know it and they know how to use it. And I just don't think you're going to run them out of there. You can. I mean, I definitely. That's why it's hard to say some of this stuff because I know that guys are thinking, man, I'm gonna try that this year. And they go out there and they jump them and. You don't get many chances after that. I mean, you fool around in there too much. He comes back another day, he busts you. You don't see him. You think, well, maybe he didn't show this day. You hunt another day, he didn't show. Then all of a sudden, you're telling yourself like, yeah, this doesn't work. I mean, you have to. There's a lot more to it. I'll say there's just a lot of thought process that goes into that. Some luck, sure. There's definitely some luck that goes into it, but you can't just aimlessly wander around trying to jump deer and then think you got it.
No, I'd agree. And maybe this is something that you're doing, but when I'm going out to scout to jump a deer, and a lot of the reason I've been doing that out west is because I'm kind of starting over from square one, right? I had a big bunch of properties built up in Michigan where I knew the areas pretty well and had a good idea where the bedding areas. Out here, I don't, and I don't have enough time to scout all these areas, or they're far away from where I live. So one of the things I'm doing is purposely walking, wind to face, like you said. I think you have a lot better odds of that deer coming back if he just hears you or sight jumps as opposed to smelling you. So that's a tactic that I'm purposely trying to employ is coming in from downwind. And then another thing, I think you hit the nail on the head, at least again in my experience, is you better have a real good idea what you're going to do after that, because you're probably only going to get one or maybe two chances if you're lucky after you jump that deer. So it's kind of a high risk, high reward strategy for sure.
Oh, for sure it is. And I definitely wouldn't say or tell guys to make that the number one tactic because I think you're going to booger up a lot of property. And I hope that guys don't do that because if everybody that's hunting public land starts doing that, we're not going to have any mature deer running around on them. So, you just have to be smart about it. It definitely can work to your favor and don't get, the biggest thing is don't get discouraged if you are out scouting and that happens. I mean, look at it, look it over, visualize, pay attention to any and every bit of sign, walk around the bedding area. I mean, spend some time in there, figure it out, and hopefully, if you do that, hopefully you can jump right back in the following morning or something. I still think, I've had him come back in. I think a lot of guys think, well, if you're not back in there the next day and he comes in, he smells you, that's game over. I don't think so. I've seen it to where they'll come back in there. Sure, I'm sure that bothers them a little bit, but I've come back into spots I've done that a week later, and that deer be right in there, and have success and kill him, or he gets by me or something. I see him, he was in there, but yeah, I think you can get away sometimes. Anyways, I think you can get away with a little more than maybe what guys would believe. And then sure, there's the deer have personalities. I'm certain that some of them I've jumped never came back, never came maybe back into that area, that specific area. He might have been close and I just didn't, relocate him or something.
One final question on jumping deer, and You've had success with this tactic a few times, at least that I know of. Has there been any time of the year where you've had more success? For example, early season, pre-rut, rut, late season. Is there any time where you think that seems to work better than another time of the year?
Early season, to me, 100% early season because those deer haven't been jacked with as much. So I think they're a little more, they tolerate maybe a little bit more. I mean, a mature deer, let's face it, they're not going to tolerate much, but early season has been for me the most successful time for that, for that to play out. I think because of a few different reasons, possibly there's more foliage on that time of the year. You can get a little bit closer to them deer before they see you if they don't hear you and booger out of there. So you have a better chance of possibly even seeing them when they get up and jump and get out of there. So early season, 100% for me is when I favor that tactic more. Now, don't get me wrong, I'll scout aggressively all through the season, but I've definitely had my success with that more so in the early season.
Yeah, and I asked that question, and I kind of thought, without ever asking you that prior, that might be your answer. And I want to tie that into something I learned. Well, I had Dwayne Diefenbach. He's the research biologist from Penn State University on the podcast a few episodes ago, and all the GPS collar study, the early season bucks, up until I think it was about the second week of October was when they really started moving around. Prior to that, those deer are holding tight to a really small area that's generally got food, water, and cover. And like you said, those deer, especially if they're an older, mature buck, they've probably lived in that area or an area like that for several years. And I think it is hard to bump them out of there. Like you said, you can definitely do it, but one time, in my experience, usually isn't enough. I mean, of course, there's exceptions, but it seems like early season is a great time to employ that tactic because it just seems to work. And I want to go back to something you said too. You don't necessarily, you don't want to be going out there and bumping every single deer on purpose. It shouldn't be the number one tactic. But if you don't have a lead on one from other types of scouting or cameras or whatever, glassing, and you're getting out in the field and trying to locate a deer, and you do bump one, that's a great time to employ that tactic, I think.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting on the collar studies. I agree. I mean, that's from my experience. So I've definitely seen. I don't know. It seems like they'll come back into those areas, especially in the early season. I think any time of the year though that deer where he's at is obviously. I mean, it's been pulled by several good hunters, but I think that's where they want to be. I mean, they've used those areas before most likely, and they know it. It's kept them alive. And you can't tell me, or I don't believe anyways, that there's not been predators that have not jumped those deer from that area. And they just make a little loop and they come right back into it. That's my thoughts anyways.
Right. Well, we talked a lot about in-season scouting here, and I guess that's probably, at least how I think about scouting, that's the last phase. So I want to back up and ask you, one, how much cyber scouting do you do, and what are you looking for when you're reading like an aerial or a topo map? Give me an idea. Let's say I'm a new hunter. What are you looking for? Someone that's experienced. What's jumping out at you? Areas that get you excited on a map, aerial or topo.
Okay, so I hunt some hills around here. They're more so like rolling hills. I do hunt Illinois too, and that is much deeper terrain over there. So terrain features. It depends on time of the year too, but I'm always looking at terrain and how ridges kind of run together, saddles, probably the stuff that most of your guys are looking for. And a lot of times too, said this before, but like your saddles and your hills and stuff like that, sometimes the best ones are the ones that don't show up. But as far as cyber scouting goes, yeah, I'm looking for terrain, habitat edges, and kind of the overall size of the property and what the parking in and around that property looks like. So if it's a property that, there's many different access points, I'm probably going to overlook it. I'm probably just going to not waste my time on it. Because again, I don't have a lot of time to scout new properties now. I mean, I do most of that this time of the year, but I'm also trying to catch up on some things I've neglected during the hunting season, as I'm sure you know, and probably anybody knows. But yeah, that's the main things I'm looking for: terrain, habitat edges, overall size of the property, and kind of what the parking and stuff looks like. Also, if I can get away from populated areas. So I live in a pretty big town, we'll call it. There's some guys, that are definitely watching the stuff out there on YouTube now and hunting most of this local public. So I think if you could venture further out away from the high populated areas, you stand a better chance. They're going to have less pressure on them.
Okay, let's talk about terrain. And one of the things that I've found interesting in these first couple episodes of the podcast is a lot of guys have mentioned hunting areas that are absent of what you think of a traditional sign, let's say rubs and scrapes. So are there any instances where, let's say you cyber scout an area and you identify some terrain features, you get in there and there's not a ton of that type of sign? Are you still going to hunt? And if so, why? Or if not, why not?
For me, honestly, probably not. Just because I don't have. Now, I definitely, without a doubt, there's definitely properties that I go through, and even my in-season scout and stuff, that I go through and I don't see the sign I'm looking for, and I write it off, and I'm sure I know that I've passed through some areas that have held big deer. Because, I mean, let's face it, there's very few of those out there. They definitely don't lay down the majority of the sign. I've heard many a times that your mature deer are the ones that rub up the woods. I personally don't believe that. I don't. Maybe on some where they have some, competition, there's multiple big deer, but they just don't lay down as much sign. And I don't know if it's because honestly there just aren't as many of them. They don't have the competition, so they don't have to. But I've got to have something. I've got to have. There's got to be some. If that heat cut a track, big track. If I don't see a big tall rub that leads me to believe there's a big one there, or have a sighting of one or something like that, or scrape that has a big track in it. Yeah, I'm probably not going to waste my time just because I don't have a lot of it. So for me, I'll probably move on and try to find something that shows me or tells me that there is at least a big deer coming through there at some point.
Okay, and one more follow-up question to that would be, let's say you get in this area, and and I think I'll let you define the size of the area and your answer, but let's say you've cyber scouted a couple good terrain features on a piece that's newer to you, and you get in there. How close do you need to find sign to that terrain feature to hunt it? Is that 100 yards, 100 acres, a half mile? What's the threshold for you? I mean, I know this is probably highly situational, but on average, what would you say? Where you're going to say, yep, there's enough sign to hunt this terrain feature, or no, I'm moving on.
So like, we'll just take a ridge system that offers, a lot of good bedding. In other words, it has a lot of secondary points that comes off of it. It offers a lot of good bedding. I mean, I hope to at least find some sign if I don't find it right on those secondary points in the bottoms, where the deer, a lot of times they'll drop down off into those bottoms and they'll cross through them. If I don't find immediate sign like there or down in the bottoms, or maybe even, I may even scout a little bit up on the opposite ridge side and see if I can cut something. But for me, it has to be pretty close, because if I spent too much time wandering around outside of that area, I would waste a lot of time. And sure, again, if I had more time, I mean, my threshold would definitely be a lot larger than what it is now. But generally, 300-400 yards, if I have to give a number in it, we'll say, something like that, maybe a little further. Just trying to find something, some kind of sign that tells me that there might be a mature deer working and using that area.
Yeah, and feel free to agree or disagree here, but I feel like at this point, when you've got some more, the experience that you've got, at some point in season, you're going to find an area like that meets that criteria. So if you're in an area that doesn't, just keep moving until you find one of those, right?
Right. Yeah. Correct. Yeah. Because I mean, there is some big chunks of land around. I mean, some of them are. The nearest property to me is about 40. think it's about 40 minutes from me. And then most of the stuff I hunt is a little over an hour. And then there's some bigger chunks of property that's, too. So, okay, so if I can get the time, I mean, I've got property to work with around. So yeah, I just write those areas off.
All right. Well, we covered kind of what you look for cyber scouting, and we've touched on in-season scouting quite a bit. What are you doing in the spring, let's say this time of year to green up? Let's say, I don't know what it is down there, middle of April, first part of May. What are you looking for, and how are you going to translate that into your approach in the fall?
Well, I'm trying to, I'm really dialing in on learning more about like the bedding areas, maybe even the bedding areas that I already know. Let's face it, I mean, there's pressure that's climbing on these properties, pretty heavily. So, and I'm seeing more and more tree stands, like permanent tree stands popping up, looking for ribbons, tacks, anything like that shows me or tells me that the guy's probably been walking through there, because I've seen big deer stay in those areas, even with that pressure coming in there. And they just work around them. They work around those stands. I mean, they're masters at figuring people out, especially if if you're habitual about your ways of coming in and your access and stuff like that. It doesn't take them long to figure that out. Sometimes I'm sure they move on, but I've seen it enough that they'll stay in those areas. So I'm trying to learn a little bit about that to see if there's some new pressure, that's came in on those spots. And I'm also using this time of the year, I think I said it earlier, but, learning new properties is a big thing for me. Learning new properties and learning some new areas on some of these pieces that I've been on, or not necessarily learning, but doing some pass through to see if maybe the deer have shifted, the big deer have shifted around. So I have seen it where they'll shift over a ridge system or two, based on some pressure and whatnot, or maybe, the acres were better over here. There's a better mass crop over here or something. Whatever it be, think it anymore, you have to kind of stay on top of that stuff. So I'm using that. Again, I'm looking at hunter sign is a big thing for me on properties that I know. Definitely checking that out. I'm marking it on my maps and then trying to figure out from there how the big deer are working around them. Because a lot of times I think they do that. They'll work around and either they're set up in a manner that they can watch that hunter access that, or they're looping well downwind of it, or cutting access trail, or whatever it be. So those are kind of the main things I'm looking at, and of course I'm going back through and checking out bedding areas to see, maybe even bedding areas I hunted to see if there's any sign of anything in there.
All right, trying to find out what was active during the season, if maybe you didn't get to hunt that area, or trying to.
Right,
Yeah.
right, exactly.
Okay, well, I think we covered now cyber scouting, off-season scouting, in-season scouting, which I think we're going to talk about that a little more. But I want to move on to hunting out of state, and it seems like there's a few guys out there, man, wherever they go, stuff just dies, and I think you're in that category. So you mentioned hunting Illinois. I believe you've hunted Arkansas before. So I want to hear your approach when you're going out of state on, let's talk about specifically a completely new property. Are you doing anything differently than when you've already have history on a property?
Yeah, so like if say, like, you mean like if I'm going to hunt it and I haven't been on it at all, I haven't done any previous scouting.
Yeah, let's say maybe you've cyber scouted, but no boots on the ground.
Yeah, that's where I'm pretty aggressive. That's where I'm going, and I'm still hunting. I will still hunt through some areas, especially if I think it's like if I find something on the map that I really think that there might be a good possibility that there could be a good deer in there. I'll take my time with that area, or if I'm moving along at a decent pace, and all of a sudden I start running into some big time, and I'll slow down from there and really, I'm looking at the maps and trying to figure out possibly where that deer could be, what the terrain looks like around there. But yeah, I will stay on foot. I used to, I've done it a little bit in the passing ways. You go to a new property and you look at a terrain feature and you just jump in on the stand and stuff. And I can't do that now. That would drive me crazy to do something like that. So I'm definitely moving, definitely scouting along, looking at new spots, trying to find, any sign basically that would show me or tell me that a big deer is in the area, aggressively moving, trying to jump them is the main tactic that I'm doing when I'm hitting a new property.
So let's say you're going to hunt a 1,000-acre property, just to throw a number out, and you've picked out maybe 3 or 4 terrain features or something on the area that stuck out to you. The first day or two, even when you get there, you're on foot then, and you're moving terrain feature to terrain feature.
Oh, I'm definitely staying on foot. Like this year, there was a kind of a opportunity that popped up for me. A good buddy told me about this property and in Illinois, and it was a couple-hour drive for me, but felt like it was worth it, and it was receiving a lot of pressure there. But I want to get on it and see. There was definitely some mature deer there, so I stayed on foot the entire time, pretty much until that day that I, told you where I jumped the big deer. I did get in the saddle that I don't know if it was 2 days or so later, 2 or 3 days later when I killed him coming back in here. But I stayed on foot that whole time, and I'll be honest, I had some close opportunities. I mean, I ran across several deer and was able to slip up and get close. Threw back on one actually. But yeah, I'm definitely staying on foot. I'm staying on foot. I'm either looking to jump one or I'm looking for that real fresh hot sign. That's the main thing. Whether that be tracks, maybe it's a big rut or something like that. But I like to stay on foot. It's hard for me to sit in the stand anymore, especially on a new property.
When you're on foot, I assume, I mean, you talked about still hunting a little bit. You're not moving at a constant pace, right? I think maybe that's a mistake that I've made previously is I really try to dial into like the hunting mindset now, right? Move, stay in the shadows, stop by cover, glass a lot. Like, what's your approach when you're moving through a property like this and like you said, on foot?
Well, yeah, sometimes I am moving fast. I'll be honest. Sometimes I'm like if I feel like it's an area like say I'm going through some open timber or something like that. I'm probably going to move fairly quickly toward some type of habitat edge or maybe some terrain features or whatever. But I'll move quickly through them areas because if you don't move at a decent pace, you're not going to cover enough ground up to maybe up your odds to run into a deer. And again, I'm not scared to bump them up. Even if I bump them up and that deer smells me, at least I know, okay, there's one here, so now I'm in the game. From there, I have to, try to put the rest of the puzzle together. What you might do, going back in here or whatever. But yeah, if I'm coming up to some areas that like an edge, like, we'll just say like a clear cut edge or something, I will slow down and I'll do, like you said, I'm staying in the shadows. That's a big thing. I can tell you do a little bit of that because that's definitely a big key to still hunting, staying in the shadows, no fast movements, using your glass, just moving along it. And I'm trying to, look for multiple things. I'm looking for deer, and I'm also trying to look up ahead to see if I can spot sign, fresh sign up through there. And then working toward that, so it's a combination. I mean, I move fast in certain areas, and I definitely slow down if I feel, again, it goes back to that gut feeling. But if I get that feeling, that sense that there could possibly be a big deer here, I'll slow down a lot. Sometimes moving very, very little. So yeah, it varies.
No, I think you definitely made some good points there. So we're talking about going in blind to a new property, and you've obviously had at this point in your career a bunch of experience at that. Looking back, what do you think some of the mistakes that you've made personally, and then I guess I know you're on the forum quite a bit. What do you think are some of the more common mistakes people are making when they're going in blind? Like at this point in your career, what are you doing different than maybe you were 5 years ago?
And definitely in the past, it would have been not moving enough. I would go in blind and I would find a terrain feature, or I may even just go in and find a big rub or something like that, and just kind of randomly set up on it, hoping that there was a decent deer around, or even cutting a track or something like that along, cutting across a ditch and set up there and just in hopes of, a big deer showing up, jumping into the terrain or something like that. But I think that again would probably be mistakes that maybe your average guy or, is making, finding something like that, finding sign and just kind of randomly setting up on it without really thinking or knowing much more, to the puzzle. So, I mean, there's definitely times I see hot sign and I'll slow way down and I may even hunt it, but I'm pretty confident when I do that, that deer's probably close, whether that's, whatever it be, terrain that would offer good bedding, or I know there's a clear cut right over here that you'd be bedding up next to or something like that. But for me just to find something and then jump on it, jump on post anymore, I won't do that. I feel like you can waste a lot of time doing that because, a big deer can be coming from a mile away or something, and that would also depend on time of the year. So I don't think in the early season, I know the deer do travel, but if I find sign like that, then I'm a little more confident, that the deer could possibly be a little bit closer. Now you get into the stages of the rut, as we all know, that deer could be who knows where
Right.
Coming from. So yeah, I would say just randomly setting up and not maybe gathering enough pieces of the puzzle there.
Okay. No, that's a really good point to be made, I think, for sure. The next question here, this came off the Hunting Beast, and I was curious as well. So you're shooting, 1, 2, 3. I think one year you got 5 bucks, right? You're shooting usually several good bucks a year. How often are you in an area where you're seeing a target buck? Are you also seeing like younger bucks or does? Are these areas where you're finding these bigger bucks? Are they hanging out by themselves, or are you passing a lot of younger deer before you're encountering these bigger bucks?
Okay, yeah, that's a good one. That would be based on the property. So like in the farm country and stuff, some of those chunks of timber, and they're not quite as big as like like say I'm on the Mark Twain where there's thousands upon thousands of acres of just vast timber. And I've got some local properties like that too, and some of the stuff I hunt in Illinois, there's just thousands of acres of just timber. So like if it's farm country, I have seen the big mature bucks in and around areas where there are some subordinate bucks, some smaller deer and even does in and around there. And a lot of times it's funny in some of them areas like that, it's almost like they set up in a manner that they use those other deer to protect them. So they're definitely hard to get in on. That was one of the big shockers for me when I came from hunting more of the big timber, that, yeah, you could find the bigger deer maybe a little easier because you use tracks in the field, blasting, a little easier to figure out maybe which direction they were traveling to. But man, beating the other deer, coming out of the bedding area as well was tough. I was getting busted by some of the subordinate bucks. So
And you're talking about in farm country now? You're saying that's more of a challenge?
yeah, it was a different challenge. It seemed like I could locate them quicker and easier, but it was definitely, I couldn't just find him. Okay, he's traveling out this way, and boom, set up right here. I mean, I had to take into account how all the other deer were moving in that area. So you have to pay attention to that. But in the bigger timber and stuff, it seemed like they were more solitary animals. I think that's why they're harder to find because there's just not a whole lot of deer sign generally in some of them areas where they're at. And you can walk right past a ridge that a mature deer is living on. There may not be any sign. He may not lay down any sign on that ridge. He may lay down a ridge or two over where there's some does or some food that he's working toward. So it's definitely, there's challenges in both, I think there. I can't say that one is harder than the other. I will say I think in the bigger timber it's a little harder to locate it.
Thanks for that explanation. That makes sense. I think that makes a lot of sense. I want to move on to a post that you did on the Hunting Beast. Ryan Anderson, there for a while, lockdown. He was doing a Q&A series with some of the more popular members. And one of the things you talked about was finding beds in the postseason and then locating areas that were likely to concentrate buck movement and using those areas of concentrated movement to kind of spot check in season for big buck activity. So first of all, can you describe one of those areas, or the types of areas or terrain features that would concentrate movement near a bedding area? And then how do you go about spot checking those in season? And I think this is maybe one of the ways that you're finding active areas without contaminating the area before you hunt it. So I think that was interesting observation. And if you could just explain that whole process a little bit.
Yeah, there's a couple different ways there. So like one of them would be, you know, you get into that steeper stuff, especially in Illinois. Those big bucks, like they're crossing, several spots where they're crossing ditches and drainages and stuff like that. They're leaving out of the bedding area and they're going down, they're crossing through this ditch, and he peeks over this secondary point here, and the side hill in it, and he crosses through another one. So if I feel like I can find one of those, find his tracks going through there, and then it's at a safe distance to where the wind's he's not gonna get my wind, he's not gonna see your stone or anything, and I can slip up into that and just check it, And sure, there's sometimes that he's probably maybe cutting a little further down or something, or he just skips over it, he jumps it, and I don't catch the track or something. But at least when I'm scouting through there and I see that, bam, I know, okay, well, that deer's in here using now, because there's a fresh sign right there. Could be a scrape in a spot outside of a bedding area every year, that may be at a safe distance, or, some rubs, cluster rubs or something, or an area of rubs that he opens up when he's in that area, checking does. And one of the biggest things I've used to my advantage in doing that is like field edges. So like if a buck's bedding, he could be bedding, several hundred yards away, but he's working toward that field edge. And they generally have a way about coming out in the field. I mean, most of the time, the big boys will come out, in the lowest spot of the field. I think they do catch the thermals and stuff falling down through there, and they do come out in those. So you can generally go to those if there's a big one around and search around there and find his tracks. And that's led to several kills over the years, being able to do that, to go in and check those edges like that. Because, a lot of times, that deer's far enough away from that field that you're safe if you go and check it. And if you find that sign there, then, hopefully the bedding area well enough to get in there, slip in, and catch him coming out of there. And like I said, I've had a lot of success with doing that. So
Appreciate that explanation, because I think that's one of the areas guys hear about in season scouting and they're confused, or maybe they don't have a tactic to say, all right, I want to get in there and I want to see if the sign's there, but I don't know how to do it without getting right in the bedding area. And I think you provided some good examples there of how you can check areas from a safe distance, assuming you already have a good idea where the bedding area or areas are at, and you can find that hot sign.
yeah, I think that's one of the things, like in scouting, if guys can maybe think about that, think about, okay, well, I found the bed. It looks like, based on maybe rubs or something, or trail sign, whatever, that he's working toward this way, or if there's, some ag down in there, most likely he's working toward that way, and then try to get outside of that and find some sign that he's laying down in between that area in the field, or even down in the field. If you go down in there and you can, you're pretty good with tracks and stuff. That's tough, because it's been preached a lot, and it's very true. There are definitely mature deer that don't have a big track always on them, but I think the majority of the time they stand out. There's just not many of those animals. They stand out, whether the tracks seem getting a little further, or if you can watch how they walk. Their stride is definitely longer than your average deer. So learning tracks is a big one. Person learns tracks, that can sure up your odds on killing mature deer. I have to say that.
Yeah, and you brought up a good point there. I think sometimes people get micro-focused on the size of the track, but stride length and stride width too, like the front end of a mature buck is much wider than a doe. So if you see the bigger tracks quite a bit wider than the smaller tracks in a set of tracks, then you can make a good guess that that's a wider chested deer, which is probably a buck.
Right, exactly. Yeah, there's definitely several things there you have to take into consideration. And just seeing one big track, I mean, I have to know that deer is walking. That doe running or even just trotting a little bit can be very deceiving.
One of the other things I wanted to talk to you about was morning hunts. So on the hunting beast especially, we all know Dan is a big fan of the afternoon hunts. But I've read somewhere in one of your previous posts that you actually prefer morning hunts. And one of the first questions I had about hunting mornings is, are you ever going in blind on a morning hunt?
If I am, I'm going in after daylight. No, I just won't randomly go in and set up blind on an area. Now I will go in and kind of do my still hunting through or whatever. But no, I'm definitely not going to go set up blind on a spot in the morning and hope or whatever that one comes through. I think morning hunts I love them. I mean, if you can figure out how that deer's coming in there and you got all the pieces of the puzzle right, your access is absolutely huge on morning hunts. It's huge on all hunts, but it's a big thing. You have to make sure you're not crossing over the way he's coming back in there. But if I know that, I mean, I love the hunt mornings and stuff. I'm a morning person anyways. But no, I won't go in there blind and just set up. I'll go in after daylight and I'll work through the area.
It's almost like you knew what the next question was going to be, and that's what kind of area do you look for an ideal morning setup, and how would a morning setup for you differ from an evening hunt?
Well, like on a morning hunt, I mean, obviously it's, bedding area, getting close to the bedding area, in close tight to the bedding area. So that's what I'm looking for. I have to know too that there's one in there, whether that's a jump in or, some fresh sign or something around there. And then a lot of times, I mean, you can find those spots. You can find a big mature deer, and you can find that bedding area, and you can look at it, and you're just like, yeah, there ain't no way I can't hunt this. So you have to know that you can hunt it. Don't go in there and pollute it and mess the spot up when you'd have better odds on hunting in the evening of a deer getting out of there.
Let me stop you right there real quick. What would be some signs that you couldn't successfully hunt in the morning? What type of areas in the past have you found out, well, that looks like I could get away with a morning hunt, but I realize I can't?
Okay, yeah, like drainages and stuff. A lot of times these big deer will come in through like a draw or a drainage down through there, and maybe you think you can manipulate the wind. And I don't know how many times I've been busted a lot over the years trying to do that. They catch them falling thermals. I mean, let's face it, they're masters at getting in there and doing that. So you have to really pay attention to that. I mean, oftentimes on some of the hunts I have been successful on in the mornings, I mean, it was a matter of just that deer getting a few more steps and boom, it was game over for me. So that hunt in Illinois, that deer I killed in the morning this year coming back through there, he was a matter of about 10 maybe yards max, and it would have been game over for me where I shot him. I mean, he would have got downwind of me. And a lot of times you almost have to set up like that. It seems for me, anyways, from what I've found, that you hopefully you can kill them before they get to that point. Hopefully, no other deer come through there. So yeah, they just use again I'm in hills. They use those drainages so well that they're hard to beat a lot of times.
So you're going to avoid, if I understand correctly, you're going to avoid an area where you anticipate a buck coming from low up a drainage and where you'd have to set up higher on a side hill or maybe on the top of a ridge. That's not a good morning setup then, correct?
Yeah, unless there's say like a real deep ditch down in the bottom, and you can set up in a manner to where you can get yourself to kind of fall off down in that and carry. But I'll be honest, I haven't had any success doing that. I know some guys I think that have pulled that off, but I haven't personally had any experience with that. But I would definitely try that if I felt like that ditch was, if there's a big deep ditch and I felt like I could get right on top of it. Maybe the deer's running right alongside of it, which they like to do a lot of times coming in the mornings. and I can get my scent ball up in there. Or if because they're not running probably miles of the drainage, if you can figure out where he's kind of dipping off or crossing the ridge and coming down into that drainage and then circling and hooking and going up, to the bedding area. I have seen that before and found that where they'll come off of a point that leads down into the bottom and they kind of loop and they head up toward their bedding area. If you can figure that out and get below that, then you're golden, So, a lot of times in the rut too, sometimes in deer, I love late October. Seems like the big boys are on their feet later in the mornings. They're out checking the does, or maybe they bed up in a different spot and they wait, a couple hours, let the does filter back in, and then they cut through and they check the scrape, check the trails, and they'll work back in there. So a lot of times that time of the year, I feel like you can get away with a little more. You can, sometimes the deer are coming in there when thermals are rising, the sun's up and stuff. So I love that time of the year for morning hunts.
That's a great segue into the next question is, are there any times of the year that you'll totally avoid a morning hunt, or what kind of conditions? Let's say you have an area that works well for a morning hunt under certain conditions. Are there times of the year or conditions that you'll avoid?
I'll be honest with you, I won't hunt an area like that on a full moon. I'm not a real big moon guy and all that. I definitely believe there are some, the overhead stuff and all that, but from my experience with full moon, those deer are back in their bedding areas well before daylight. They do definitely, or I've seen anyways, them get up and move, later in the mornings and stuff. But yeah, I won't hunt, no matter what time of the year it is, a bedding area early in the morning on full moon. In later season, I don't know. I don't know that I've had any success really in the mornings on deer. I could be missing one or two, but I don't like mornings so much in the late season. It just seems like those deer again are kind of back in their bedding areas a lot of time, unless you've had some weather, or something that may have kept them out later or something, like it rained on up into late that evening, so the deer were a little bit later getting up and going about their ways on their feeding cycle, maybe they'd be a little late coming back in. But yeah, I don't care much for doing it late season and full moons.
Okay, no, that's good information. The full moon thing, I'm not a big moon guy, but I think there is some secondary impact from some of the moon stuff. So I think time of the year, temperature, that stuff is usually the primary factor, but I don't totally discount the moon having some secondary effect. So that's news to me, and something I'm going to pay a little more attention to going forward.
Yeah, I've definitely seen it, man. Trail cameras, experiences out there. I don't know. It would be. I'm a firm believer in the moon as far as the full moon and stuff. But them deer I don't know. They're just back in their bedding areas early. It seems. And that's my experience. It may not be that way everywhere, but at least from what I've seen, and I believe.
I want to move on now to first time sits. One of the big tenets of the hunting beast is, first time sits, mobile hunting. So are there any circumstances where you'll hunt the same area, let's say back-to-back days, or a morning, then an evening, or maybe you hunt it and then 2 days later you're back, or 3 days later? And if so, how do you decide to either hunt the same tree or maybe hunt a different tree in the same immediate area?
Yeah, first sets are definitely where it's at, as far as being in the majority of my kills, looking back on that, it's definitely been most of the time, the first set. But yeah, I will, and I have hunt a spot multiple times. I'll say multiple. I very seldom do it 3 times anymore now. I used to, but, if you set an area that has a lot of deer movement through it, and you set it 3 times or so, you can watch. You can definitely see the deer movement, the windows. For the most part, if you're in an area that many times, and deer have figured it out. If I feel like I've hunted in an area, the deer didn't show, maybe for whatever reason. I felt like I got in and out of there clean. I will come back to it, but I will shift how I hunt that area. I'm just going to make an assumption, that deer came through and smelt me and, realized I was in that area. So I'm probably going to move downwind of that tree that I was in. And how far downwind will kind of depend on the terrain. If it's a ridge system or something like that, I may only drop just a little way below it, maybe 50, 60 yards or something, or if it's flatter and the deer could loop it farther, maybe you could be seen, I don't know. That's kind of depends on a couple of different factors there, but I'll definitely move downwind of that tree.
Okay, so you're taking an educated guess based on the terrain, somewhere between, I mean, again, this is general, but somewhere between 30 and 150 yards downwind, depending on terrain.
Yeah, right. Most of the time, I would say 70-ish yards or so within that range to the tree. But yeah, I mean, it could be as far as 150 yards if it was flat and maybe open or something, or next terrain habitat edge. I mean, is that far down? Yeah, I could definitely see him moving that, circling down through there. So
Man, you've given a lot of great information up to this point. We're kind of coming into the last few questions I have for you here, and this is another question from the hunting beast. And I think these stories almost always are useful, or like you said, making mistakes is where you learn some of the best lessons. So can you give us a story of a specific buck that got away, and what did you take away from that experience?
yeah, sure. I chased one. Oh, that deer kicked my butt. I chased one a few years ago. I think it had to be probably 15, 16, somewhere around in that time. Maybe in 17. But I chased this deer. He was a big old mature buck. Several guys knew about the deer. I was getting a few pictures from some other buddies that knew some guys that were hunting out there, and they were sending pictures and like, look what I got, got on this camera. And I had already kind of knew about the deer. I found his sheds the year prior and found both of them. And he was living in a spot that, he was just able to really manipulate this spot. Like there was really no way now that I look back on it that I felt like I could. I ain't gonna say he was unkillable because he definitely was, and I would like to have that chance over again. But the way he used this area was just it was awesome. It was kind of like a bowl shaped, so it was a big ridge system that made the shape of a bowl. He was betting on these secondary points that jut it down off into this, and a lot of these secondary points fell off this ridge system so far down that at the bottom of it was pretty steep. But they may have only been 40, 50 yards apart. Some of them he would just bounce depending on the wind back and forth on those. And I know that because I went in there and I busted him out one day and I dropped the trail camera down in that bottom and I caught him. I think it was that same day or the next day cutting right down through there. He came right back in. But I seen that deer. This is one of the deer that surprised me how often he came back in there. But I think this is a heavily pressured property. And I think he just realized that, that spot had kept him alive. I mean, he was definitely 5+ years old. And I hunted him and seen him probably 5 times, I think I'd seen him. And every time the way he would come back in, through these saddles and stuff, I'd set up on a saddle where I'd seen some sign of him crossing. The way he'd come back in, he'd bust me. The way he would leave out of there, he would drop down off into that bottom in the evenings, let all the thermals pull up down in there, like, you could smell everything around there, and he would just stand down there in that bottom. I mean, just literally stand and just wouldn't come out of there. Every hunt, it seemed like no matter where I was at or what I thought I had on him, he just used that spot so well, it kept him alive. But I learned a lot from that deer. I just learned that it seemed like I would make a move, and then he, had smelt me or whatever and figured me out. So then he would play off of that. And I even tried to play off of some of my sets and stuff. And I don't know, he was just always one step ahead of me. But what I did learn is on a heavily pressured piece of property like that sometimes those big deer, they find spots like that. And man, they'll come back to them a lot more than a person thinks. That one shocked me at how much he came back and used that area. Again, I know he busted me a couple times. One day I went in there and kicked him completely out of there just so I could look at the spot a little bit better, hope to find and figure it out. But he kept using it. And I don't know what happened to him. I never heard of anybody killing him the following year. There was no sign of him in there, so maybe I put enough pressure on him. There was actually a couple stands that popped up, not in the bowl, but close to it. But he never showed back up. So, but yeah, I learned a lot from that deer. I just learned, how well they use their areas, especially a big mature deer. I did learn. I seen it firsthand how they'll drop down in the bottoms, let the thermal pull up down in there. That was a big eye opener to me. Again, you can read all this stuff. You can watch videos on it. When you firsthand experience, I mean, that stuff sticks with you, and you're like, okay, yeah, that's what they do, and just how he was able to pick me apart. No matter where I was set up the following hunt, he worked off of it. He was able to move far enough downwind or circle in a way, come in a way that no matter where I was at, basically, he was going to catch my wind. So just the master of terrain.
With that said, you said you wish you had another crack at him. Knowing what you know about that deer now, let's assume you knew all that information. What would you do different going back?
Well, I think honestly, one of the things I would try to do is is have a buddy go in there with me because the way I jumped that deer out of there, I mean that was the way. I'm pretty sure if you jump him out of this area, that's where he's going to go. There's a saddle up through there that crossed over and led into real thick, nasty thicket right there on the other side of the ridge. He would just dive off into that. So even with a bow, I think, because when I busted him out of there, I came off the other side of the ridge. He was on the far side of it. And, on the opposite side, I'm sorry, of the ridge. And, busted him and he just he jumped up, he ran up to the top of the point there, that he was bedding on and stood there, looked back, and then he just kind of trotted up over and off this ridge. So had I been, sitting on the other side of that over there, I'm sure once he crossed over and got close to that big stuff, he slowed down. I think he could have got a shot. So that would definitely be a tactic I would not be opposed to trying. Having a buddy, and take him in there and have him do just as I did there and spook him out of there and try to be on the other side. And I say that just for that deer, that's not a way that I would enjoy killing a deer. I like to outsmart him and stuff, but that deer drove me crazy. So I would definitely do that on that deer.
All right, two more questions here. So you've obviously had a lot of success, killed a lot of really good deer, but I think good hunters are always evolving. Are there any areas of your game that you feel you still need to improve upon?
Oh, sure. Yeah. I mean, essentially everything. I mean, but cyber scouting, I don't think that I don't know, maybe patient enough with that to really dig as deep sometimes as I need to on properties. I like to have, I like to get on them and dig, but I do look hard, in there and try to find areas of interest, but I could definitely improve on cyber scouting. Um, Different terrains, I have not had a whole lot of experience with more of the flat lands and stuff. Something I hope to get here in the near future as my daughter gets older and I'm able to get away a little bit more and do some more hunts traveling. Um, yeah, different terrain. Like I said, I grew up in the hills and stuff. I have a lot of experience with hills, but I've got into some river bottom stuff over in Illinois. That's kind of a different ball game, and I just love learning new terrain and how deer use it, especially mature deer. It's kind of fascinating to me. So maybe patience on some of this stuff. Some of these areas I'm a very aggressive guy on hunting. I probably dig a little too deep and hard on some of this stuff and maybe could slow down a little bit. But, that's a balancing act with time too. So yeah, I'd say those would be, I mean, I could use improvement on any and everything for sure. I definitely don't feel like I have anything figured out. Have a lot more to learn, a lot of hard lessons to and mistakes to make yet, I'm sure.
Yeah, it seems like no matter how long you've been doing it, that goes hand in hand with bow hunting. There's always something to learn or some frustration to be had.
For sure.
Well, hey, I want to thank you again. Really appreciate your time. I'm going to turn it over to you. And if you have any last words of wisdom or topics we didn't cover, or things that you'd like to convey to guys that are striving to have your level of success, floor is open to you.
Gosh, I think we covered a lot of it. Just, don't get discouraged with it. I know a lot of guys, you read stuff on the forums and you see certain guys having success every year and you try to maybe mimic those tactics. That doesn't always work for everybody, definitely need to find out your style, what your strong points are and what works for you. Maybe, there's definitely more than one way to skin a cat, I'll say. So don't just hear about, this successful guy and try to mimic his tactic and just, keep going at it. I mean, we all hunt different terrain. We all hunt different deer, different pressured areas and stuff. So figure your deer out and learn how to kill them. I mean, what I do may not work in some areas. I guess that'd be about all I have to say. Just stay at it. There's a lot to learn. Like I said, I've been in the woods all my life, essentially. I've spent my childhood all the way up to I'm 37 now. So a lot of years in the woods and a lot of hard lessons. So, and I don't think there's any way to skip over that stuff. I mean, I think you have to make those mistakes in order to grow as a hunter. There's no shortcuts in this game.
For sure. Well, hey, Justin, I know everyone's busy these days. So, again, thanks for your time. I think there's a lot of good takeaways from this episode and look forward to following along with you this fall. Good luck, and hopefully at some point we can have you back on again.
Yeah, I appreciate it, man. Thanks. I enjoyed it, and good luck to you too. And we'll stay in touch.
All right, man. Take care. Thanks.
Thank you.